Hello, Garland Nixon here. It is Friday morning and we have Joti Brar, so we're going to have some fun and we're probably going to learn something. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Joti Brar, and it's Friday morning, so we've got lots to talk about. We got a lot of different directions we can go, but here's where I want to start. One of the things that I've been reporting on lately is France, where basically the so-called left, as they call it today, the so-called left, but whatever, a political group one that is, in a nutshell, I'd say you got a lot of people that are tired of the pain of neoliberalism. They may not know how to get out of it, but they're feeling the pain. So they're trying to find a way to vote themselves out of it, whatever the case. So they get in and they're trying to vote for people who are not necessarily aligned with the Macron, a guy who literally worked for the Rothschild Bank and Goldman Sachs and all. So, it doesn't take Nostradamus, it doesn't take a genius to predict that this guy was going to do exactly what he did. Macron now says, okay, fair enough, that's a great vote, but I'm going to ignore it and I'm going to put in who I want. Meanwhile, we've got Germany, where the people in Germany are like, hey, wait a minute, we're being deindustrialized. This hurts. There's a difference between having an ideological discussion with the working class and the working class feeling the pain of neoliberalism and capitalism, right? Meanwhile, we got the US, where there's a big scramble going on because they're trying to push Kamala Harris. And there are a lot of people in this country that are like, as Malcolm X said about the field slave, if you ask them to run away, they'll say, any place is better than here, right? And I think that's what we're seeing. And so the veil of democracy is being lit. The so-called, I've heard somebody say we're in a post-democracy era. We'd have to be in a democracy era in the first place for it to be a post-democracy era. At any rate, your thoughts. Meanwhile, it seems like every couple of weeks, there's a bullet flying somewhere in the vicinity of Donald Trump. Apparently the system, for whatever reason, they don't see him as exactly what they want. They want Kamala Harris. Your thoughts on the discussion of so-called democracy in the imperialist countries. Let me give you the dynamic. So-called democracy, the working class feeling the pain of the neoliberals, of the capitalists, the imperialists, and then the pushback from the ruling class saying, okay, you kind of figured us out through pain and you're trying to go in a different direction. The answer is no. Your thoughts on all of that, if it makes any sense to you. I think I created some kind of a dynamic you can work with, Joti.
For sure. Just to come back to this concept of a post-democratic era, what you really hear articulated in that expression is it felt like the myth of democracy was true to mass of working people for a while. What made it feel true? It felt true because they weren't trying to rebel. They weren't trying to rebel because they were getting a hefty bribe for not rebelling. Imperialism works best when it uses its super profits to bribe. Sometimes it can only bribe a small section, which just gives it some kind of general stability. Other times, like after World War II, it's been able to bribe almost the entire population into essentially quiescence, acceptance. And we've talked about this before, Garland, how part of that deal is don't ask questions about where your better standard of living is coming from, how it's being paid for. It's just civilized Western values, and that's that. And look the other way at what we're doing in the rest of the world, because actually it's those people over there who are paying for the bribe we've given you, right? We don't talk about that. We have democracy. We have civilized values. What does it mean? We have social peace because people feel okay. They've basically, the vast majority have jobs, healthcare, homes, education for their children, healthcare when they need it, pensions, the basic things. They can go on holiday, and they are living without just merely existing. And, you know, so that's okay. Everything else, the crimes of imperialism are not presented to them, and therefore they're able to close their eyes to the deal that they've made, as we call it, that Faustian pact, right? But the thing about these peace deals with imperialism is they can only ever be temporary. Capitalism is not a system that can sustain the good times, right? Capitalism is a system that has boom and bust built into its very fabric. And the problem with capitalism gone global, which is what the imperialist system is, it's capitalism which has become monopoly capitalism, where the wealth of society is in so few hands, and it's global. So the whole global economy is dominated by these, you know, very tiny class of super rich, you know, controllers of corporations and banks. Well, when they hit their crisis, which they inevitably do, then there's no direction to get out of it in terms of expansion. You know, traditionally, the capitalist classes of Europe escaped their crises, which came around every 10 years. I mean, it's, you know, the first one was documented in sort of 1820. And after that, it was cyclical. There was a boom bust cycle, and kind of every 10 years, there was a massive crash, roughly. And, you know, that would involve loads of people being laid off. And in those days, that meant starving to death, you know, because they had produced too much, which could not be sold. And in the end, the way they would get out of those crises was to mothball so much production that their, you know, demand kind of started up again, but also to expand, to export, to find new markets. Now that drive has only got bigger as capital, stores of capital have got larger. The problem is the whole world is saturated. There's some monopolist controlling the market of everything everywhere. So how do you expand in that situation? You expand at the expense of some other imperialist, or in this modern world, World War I was all about the imperialists fighting each other because they needed to expand at each other's expense. World War II started like that, as we talked about last week, but then it also came up against this clash between the liberated territories of the world and the desire to reconquer those. And that's what we're seeing again today, this desire to reconquer territory, which is not being able to be looted to the extent, if at all, that the imperialists would like or need in order to escape their crisis, the economic crisis which is built into their system. So we in the West, workers, imagined, we fell for the fable of democracy for two reasons. Well, they're kind of related reasons. Mainly it's we got a big fat bribe and it felt like everything was fine. But the other thing was our class conscious leadership, our communist parties were bought off at the same time. If you look at the history of Western communism, what you see is after World War II, all these big militant working class organizations and their leaders also took the bribe. And they started telling the workers in their countries something completely different than what they used to tell them. My party speaks the same way and the same language and explains the world in the same way that the old Communist Party of Great Britain used to do from 1920 when it was founded up until 1950, right? And in the 1930s, their program was called Class Against Class. And their analysis was, our interests are not the interests of the ruling class. They never will be. The only way to escape all these problems is socialism. And here's why, and here's how. And that was the program of all the communists across the world, right? And they looked at what the Bolsheviks had achieved in the Soviet Union and said, that's what we need, right? We need to put the workers in charge. We need a planned economy, and then we will abolish all these problems that plague humanity: poverty, disease, inequality, unemployment. You know, all these things which capitalism can't solve can be solved with a planned economy, but the working class has to be in charge of managing that and running that, and you have to get rid of the exploiting class. After World War II, when the whole working class of the West was being bribed into social peace, giving up the class struggle essentially, and putting their faith in elections instead of in revolution, the communist parties fell like dominoes to this ideology that said, and I have to say it also came out of the Soviet Union after the death of Stalin, which of course was a major blow to the communist movement and its ideology. They started saying, oh, look, we've won all these gains. Now all we have to do is keep voting for the Social Democrats, the Labour Party, the Social Democratic Party of Germany, the Socialist Party in France. We'll put pressure on them. We'll make alliances with them, left-wing alliances, like we did in the war against fascism, right? We'll have a left alliance inside and outside Parliament, and we will gradually reform the system until we just arrive peacefully and democratically through bourgeois elections, right? In a capitalist state, we will elect socialism, basically, and reform capitalism into socialism. And what they did, Garland, with these two things, number one, giving people a nice life, and number two, decapitating the class-conscious leadership of the working class, was they utterly disorientated the working people. It felt as if everything we had won after World War II was not the result of titanic class battles, which in fact they were, but were something that had kind of come as a result of a rapprochement somehow, and a general understanding that this is just the civilized way to be. And also it felt like it was permanent. We can't ever go back from here. Now, a decent working class leadership would have been saying, no, the crisis is, if we've got capitalism, okay, there's a boom now because the capitalists are busy, imperialists are busy rebuilding all the stuff that got destroyed in World War II. That's how they restarted their markets, people. They destroyed a whole load of life and a whole load of infrastructure and a whole load of accumulated wealth. And then there was demand in the economy because they had to start rebuilding things that they'd broken. You know, that's the model of restarting the market of the imperialist economists. Go to war, and then you'll have contracts for rebuilding. You'll have contracts for the war industries. Then you'll have contracts for rebuilding, and all of this will trigger, you know, an upturn in your economy, you know, until it lands in the next ditch. Right? That is essentially the imperialist model for escaping global economic crisis. They don't have another one. It doesn't matter what they tell you about, you know, doing this to interest rates or printing this money, whatever. All these tweaks they try and do to manage their crisis. None of them can fundamentally get them out of it. And their real policy is austerity to try to rinse more wealth out of the working class, and war to destroy, to seize materials and markets and avenues for exploitation, and to stimulate demand in their economies by war contracts and rebuilding contracts. And so we had this situation after World War II where it seemed like it was all democratic and nice because the people weren't rebelling. The problem came when the overproduction crisis reasserted itself, actually probably at the end of the 60s. But in the 1970s, everybody was starting to feel it across the West, right? And through the 1980s, it got worse and worse. And there were many industrial battles in Britain in the 70s and 80s when we still had strong unions trying to defend working class industries and jobs and pay and conditions that were under attack because of that crisis coming back. And the thing about that period is that the working class had lost the class-conscious element of its leadership. So although there were some great trade union leaders, and especially someone like Arthur Scargill, who led the miners' strike in Britain, which was the kind of key, pivotal battle between the classes in our country in that period, and it was that the defeat of the miners which really opened the door for the defeat of every other organized section of the working class. They didn't have that understanding that these problems come from capitalism. Fundamentally, the only answer is socialism, and socialism is not electing a socialist party in the capitalist parliament, because the capitalist parliament, if you understand anything about the state, is not where the decisions are taken. It's a sideshow, it's a talking shop, it's a distraction, it's a circus. We know this, we've talked about this, how the politicians are increasingly unconvincing clowns and front people. And the whole thing to keep us, the news cycle, the election cycle. I mean, we often talk in our party about the American system of electioneering is such that you're always in some bit of the election cycle. And it's an endless driver of news stories to kind of keep you all looking over here. Like, this is what really matters. And if you just get, Trump not Kamala, or Kamala not Trump, or whoever, Jill Stein, JFK or RFK Jr., if we just get this guy who people want or don't want, or, that's the key. That's the most important. And it's like, but everything is actually happening over here, people. And this whole, narrative-driven news that isn't news, news that's not about anything, that confuses people. All of this is able to work on people because of the way that the class-conscious leadership of the working class in the West was basically dismantled after World War II. And in the USA, it was done in a very head-on manner through the McCarthyite measures, right? In our country, it was just done by simple, and in France and Germany, it was just done by buying them off, and it was very effective.
It's another angle here that I'd like to get you to comment on, because this made me think about this. Okay, let's say the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, when, people over here and in Britain were feeling pretty good, a chicken in every pot. And they'll tell you, oh, yes, one man could go to work in a factory and make a job, raise a family and have 2.5 kids and a pickup truck and a car, and his wife did blah, blah, blah. Oh, this sounds like wonderful. And so what people say is, make America great again, or let's go back to those good times, etc. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, what's happening now is inevitable. At the time, there was a struggle in Vietnam for liberation from imperialism, right? There were struggles going on in Africa. We see the Contras in Nicaragua and Venezuela and all throughout the world. There were struggles against the imperialists. They hid that here. They were involved, Indonesia, what they did there, all across the world. Well, at home, you were told, isn't everything nice and cool and calm? And isn't this great? Man, you go to a drive-in movie and you can buy ice cream and your kids grow up and they got nice schools. So they were telling you everything was going, but bubbling beneath the surface, there were anti-imperialist wars going on all over the place and pushback going on, right? And they were doing all kinds of devious things to keep those things going on. And now, to me, what's going on in occupied Palestine is people saying, man, we've had enough of this crap. We're going to try to fight our way out of imperialism. What's going on in Ukraine? The imperialists are like, oh my God, Russia's, you know what I mean? To me, what's going on in Ukraine and occupied Palestine, they act like it's something new. But all through the 50s and 60s, they were involved in wars, imperialist wars all over the country, the world, as they told us everything was okay and we're living good. There was a bubbling war against imperialism all over the world. They were bloody, they were violent, they were trying to kill as many innocent people as they could. But the anti-imperialists never stopped fighting to this day. Your thoughts on that?
You're 100% right, Garland. And it's so important for people to start to put these things together and understand that the history of capitalism and the history of imperialism is one continuous bloody genocide. It has never stopped from the earliest moments. There was genocide against their own working people. There was genocide against every colonial people that they met and whose lands they stole as they were expanding their markets in the earliest stages of capitalist production, that became very systematized by the imperialist system of monopolizing territories and rinsing everything you possibly could out of them. And after World War II, in this period that was in many ways characterized as a national liberation period, it was also a period of fierce struggle between the people trying to liberate themselves and the people trying to hang on to their colonies. We British school children, if they're told anything about the empire, they get the sort of impression that, well, that was all a long time ago. And of course, we gave everything back because, we're jolly civilized now. Of course, in the past, people were a bit crazy. That's what Victorians were like. They were just a bit racist. But now we're nice and we gave everything back. And don't you know, it was our idea to abolish slavery. And, they do all this kind of crap the way they present history. But the Cold War has been utterly misnamed, hasn't it? Okay, Russia or the Soviet Union and the USA did not go to outright war, because from 1953, and you should never forget that between 1949 and 1953, US generals were constantly pushing for the USA to drop nuclear bombs on the Soviet Union. But the point came where that was no longer remotely feasible. So well done to the Soviet Union for getting its own nuclear weapons and stopping that particular Holocaust. Okay, they couldn't invade, they couldn't drop nuclear weapons on the Soviet Union. They did everything they could instead to sabotage and undermine it in 1,000 other ways. But, and of course they waged ceaseless economic war on the Soviet Union. But in the rest of the world, as you rightly said, they were drowning the colonized peoples in blood. Every movement that tried to liberate itself was greeted with the most vicious fascistic repression. You know, the true history of that period, many struggles, when we had a Labour government that people in Britain were told by communists was like the next best thing to socialism, was busy sending soldiers that beheaded freedom fighters in Malaya, in Kenya, you know, that partitioned India and created a bloodbath and a sectarian divide that has never healed to this day and will never heal, right? Until such time as India and Pakistan in some way rapproche, I would say in some future life, probably reunite. And because that line was put there precisely with the object of making India and Pakistan permanent and implacable enemies, and telling the people of both sides that Hindus and Muslims can't live together. I mean, the truth is there's more Muslims in India than there are in Pakistan, but the myth is that Hindus and Muslims can't live together. And to this day, Indian politicians push these communal buttons in order to get elected, in order to keep the people divided amongst themselves. You know, because they are running a capitalist system, they make use of the legacy of the British divide and rule policies in order to keep themselves in power too. That's how capitalist classes operate. They need to do that to stay in power. So the Cold War, you're right, was extremely bloody. It was the flip side of the National Health Service and all of the nice life conditions that came to workers in the West, and something that was never ever talked about in the general movement. It was just like, you know, oh, we've made these gains and they're just going to get better. But of course, the truth is that imperialism fights tooth and nail to maintain its rule. It doesn't go out quietly, and it didn't go out quietly from many of its colonies. And of course, every effort, you know, every liberation struggle after it was successful was then met with first sanctions to try to stop it developing, and then with fake offers of help from a replacement imperialist that, oh, we're here to be your friends, we'll lend you money, we'll help you develop. Oh, it turns out you've just signed a pact with a different devil. And now you're in economic slavery, which in some ways can be even more effective than the direct colonial slavery, because it's hidden. The nature of it can be hidden from many people for much longer. That only lasted a certain amount of time, but still quite a few decades of people not really understanding how they got into the mess they were in. How are they still so indebted? Why are they still not developing? You know, what's the problem now? We've kicked out our colonial occupiers. There are black people in the government. We've got our own flag and our own army full of black soldiers or Asian soldiers or whatever. Why are we still in such dire poverty? You know, and of course the answer was neocolonial subjection took over from direct colonial subjection, and the end result was the same: underdevelopment, essentially enslavement, indebtedness, and a corrupt clique in power which simply serves a slightly more distant imperialist master instead of direct white faces, you know, in the government offices. Right today, we're in different circumstances in the West. The whole imperialist economy is going down the tubes in a way we haven't seen since the 1930s. And not only is that happening, but there's a section of the world which is increasingly detaching from that global economy, and as a result, doing much better. So it's like a double threat to the imperialists. On the one hand, they have this crisis that they're desperate to escape, and they can only really escape it by means of pushing down on the workers and driving to war. And on the other hand, they have these, what they consider to be deadly rivals, which are essentially their rivals because they show the world a different model, a non-imperialist model of development, but also they're rivals in the sense that they are running territories which are basically liberated, which even where they allow capitalist relations, even where they allow imperialists to come and invest and exploit their labor, they don't let them have free rein to just do what they want and loot at will. And this is seen as like the grossest insult to, you know, profit desperate corporations that and financiers that need to make more money and are being denied access to things that they think just should be theirs. You know, as far as they're concerned, all the resources, all the human labor power in the world belong to them, should be at their disposal on their terms. And anything that gets in the way of that has to be got rid of. And it's an existential driver for the imperialists, that it's not a question of logic. It's not a question of, well, maybe I can't win this fight, so maybe I shouldn't have it. You know, they can't think that way, because the problem is if they don't make the fight and win it, the whole system's going down, and then with it. So they don't have the ability to stop and make rational, you know, sensible decisions. But you're absolutely right. You know, so we have to recognize that imperialism in decline doesn't have the ability, and in this incredibly deep crisis, economic crisis, it's once more pushing down on the workers in its own countries. If you think back to the 1930s, we were imperialist countries then. You know, Britain was a much more economically powerful country in the 1930s than it is today. And yet, even in the times of a huge British Empire that existed then, and big British industry and big British lots of things, and Britain being, you know, probably the second biggest economic power in the world, huge numbers of British workers lived in abject poverty. You know, my grandfather had a shoe shop, and in the 1930s, he ran clubs for mothers to save up, kind of over the year to buy a pair of school shoes for their kids, because just buying shoes for children was, and he saw barefoot children in the streets of London in the winter, you know, and he noticed that because, you know, he sold shoes, right? And how sort of horrific that was. But it was like a common sight, because huge numbers of British people during that very depressed period, without an adequate social safety net, lived on the brink of starvation, without proper shelter, without proper clothing, without proper nutrition, without access to doctors. You know, there's stories about doctors paying sort of charity calls on people, or, you know, paying calls on people who would save up all their money to pay them for the visit, and then doing little things to try to do a follow-up visit without offending their pride, but without charging them. So, for example, there's one story of a doctor who used to leave his gloves behind in a very poor, so he could come back for his gloves, and, oh, while I'm here, I'll just have a look, because so then they didn't have to pay him. You know, these type of stories, because this was a daily part of ordinary working class people's lives in rich imperialist Britain in the 1930s. So the idea that imperialism automatically means everybody in society has a good time is wrong. What we're seeing because of the crisis is the social safety net that protected the mass of the workers in the West is being dismantled. And it's not because the imperialists want to impoverish their workers and create an unstable situation. It's because to them, it's something that they just can't afford. They need things which are profitable, and paying money for things that don't generate any revenue is just like, it's a no-no in this situation of economic crisis. So they want to push down wages, conditions, push down, the amount they're paying in social payments for infrastructure, for all kinds of things, you know, that they feel that they don't need and are a waste of money, don't bring them in, you know, decent profits. And increasingly they are, on top of all of that, they're expecting the exchequer, the national budget, which means taxation of ordinary people, to pay them, to subsidize their businesses, the huge monopolies, when they're not making enough profit. You know, the arms industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the green capitalist industries, the railway industries, the amount of huge monopolies whose profits are subsidized by the taxpayer, who also has to pay them for their services on top of the fact that we've already subsidized them, you know, is enormous. And that increasingly the exchequer doesn't pay for decent social services, does pay to subsidize the profits of monopolies. So, you know, in so many ways, as the crisis deepens, the mechanisms for sucking wealth from the poor to the extremely wealthy get more and more kind of, as you've said, kind of cannibalistic, you know, and the people feel that, you know, they feel that they're being cannibalized. They feel their lives getting noticeably worse. Everything getting noticeably more unaffordable on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. It's very, very clear. And for some people, of course, where industries left their communities, you know, maybe 40 years ago, and nothing has replaced those because we don't have a planned economy. So there are parts, for example, in the valleys of South Wales, where, you know, the main industry was mining. The mines closed down. Nothing came to replace them. And so you have whole areas where, because it's not on anybody's way, and nobody has to look at it or notice what state it's got into, you know, they're genuinely just left to rot communities, you know, completely bypassed. No state official or machinery is remotely interested in dealing with the problem of, you know, these 3 generations of people who've been left with nothing really to do. No meaningful employment, and just kind of rotting away and ignored. And you have, of course, the same situation in parts of the USA, I know. And I think you're right when you asked about Ukraine and Palestine. It's the same scenario, you know, imperialism trying to assert or maintain its control of access to markets and materials. In particular, you know, when it comes to Ukraine, it's about the desire, essentially. So Ukraine is big and it has a whole load of resources. And definitely part of the targeting of Ukraine was to grab those resources, which they have been doing. You know, Ukraine has been hugely privatized and sold off to Western and especially US corporations, but also German and others from the Western world, but very especially to US corporations. And it has a huge amount of wealth there. But there's also been this long-standing desire, as we've talked about before, to use Ukraine as a battering ram to destroy Russia, which is a huge prize. If you can get hold of Russia and loot it, as they did after the fall of the Soviet Union for a certain period of time, yes, exactly. Lindsey Graham says Ukraine's sitting on trillions of dollars of minerals and we could have those. So he's expressing that desire of the imperialists who sponsor him. We need that because we are in a crisis. We need some avenues of making profit. We need some stuff to loot and give our system a bit of a renewal. And that's what they want. You know, if you think there's trillions of dollars worth of minerals in Ukraine, what do you think there is in the whole of Russia? The whole project against Russia is a project of grabbing hold of Russia's resources, having the opportunity to super exploit Russia's people, to get Russia's resources basically for nothing, not on the market at market prices, but for nothing. That's how colonial looting works. Look at what happened to Iraq after the Iraq War. USA is still looting Syrian, Iraqi oil after those invasions, you know, for nothing, taking those resources, profiting enormously from them. So the desire to destroy Russia is about the quest to make maximum profits, to try to save a crisis-ridden system. Yeah, I know. It's really sick, isn't it? It's really sick. So you see where the drive of, those politicians who stand up and make their, endless, empty, vacuous speeches about democracy and standing with Ukraine, even as they are sending every last Ukrainian to die. This is what they're sending it to die for. This BlackRock and JP Morgan's needs to, invest their billions at a profit. The point is, we've got 15 billion sitting here, but what use is 15 billion unless it's invested and it's going to be returned to us as 16 billion, right? That's the problem for JP Morgan and BlackRock. They have so much wealth and they're unable to use it to raise the living standards of the masses, right? And they have no market. They can produce goods, but you've got to sell them to people. You've impoverished the world's people. They can't buy all the things you want to sell. What are you going to do? You've got all this wealth and you need to keep reinvesting it. But the problem is, to amass that wealth, you have to impoverish the people of the world. And this is a circle that cannot be squared. And so in Ukraine, as well as stealing Ukraine's wealth, they're wanting to do the same to Russia, which of course they did do temporarily after the fall of the USSR. But then that was stopped by the rise of the national bourgeoisie in Russia. And that's what Vladimir Putin's government represents. That's what they can't forgive him for. They absolutely can't forgive him for calling time on their looting frenzy. They were having such a good time looting Russia, and they had nice, pliable proxies, supine, very happy to, take a cup or a swig from a bottle and let them come right in and, take what you want. Just give me a, couple of £100 in the backhander and get on with it, and I'll, be your partner, But the fact that the Russian bourgeoisie got itself together and said, we don't actually have to let this carry on, right? They were the inheritors, whether they liked it or not, whether they admit it or not. They were the inheritors of the Soviet Union, and they had been educated by the Soviet Union. They inherited Soviet science, Soviet industry, Soviet agriculture, Soviet technology, Soviet capability, Soviet pride, that says, well, are we not, we're human beings. We don't just have to be your slaves. And it turns out this partnership that was sold to us is no such thing. You don't want to be our partner. You want us to be your slave. And we don't feel like we have to be your slaves, actually. That's what they will never forgive President Putin for. And with Palestine, again, it's a similar thing. It's an ongoing fight to maintain control over these vast reserves of oil and gas that are in the Middle East. Palestine has become the heart of that regional conflict because Palestine and Palestinians were the place where the settler colony was put down. But the placing of the settler colony was not aimed at Palestinians like in a personal way. It was like they're just collateral damage, which is not a very nice expression, is it? But as far as the imperialist mindset is concerned, they just happen to be in the way. The plan was, this is a jolly good plan, isn't it? The Zionists are asking us for a home. We give them this, then they will be loyal to us forever. They will be our armed outpost in the Middle East at a time of rising national liberation sentiment, at a time when we are losing our colonial grip, and also at a time when oil is the single most important commodity in the world to have control over. So that is why Israel and Zionism are so key to Western interests and Anglo-American interests in particular, because oil and banking interests are, top of the list of corporate interests in those two countries. And that's one of the reasons they've always been so intertwined, British and American imperialism. Even as Britain declined, the imperialist class of Britain really, really kind of latched itself onto America. Because they essentially see the world the same way, and they have very much intertwined financial and economic interests. And holding on to Israel is not about Palestine, Israel, 2 states, 1 state, Jews, Muslims, not about any of those things. It's about oil. It's about colonial control of resources. It's about imperialist profit taking.
A whole lot's been said in a brief amount of time, so that was great. Let me ask you this. We're seeing an increase in the crushing of dissent. You know, Sarah Wilkinson, Richard Medhurst, people who are speaking out against imperialism. Over here recently, our good brother and comrade, Dan, two of them are very good, both very good friends of mine, Danny Shaw, and he was returning from a Palestinian film festival in London, I believe, or somewhere, right? And Danny does a lot of work on Haiti, Venezuela, Cuba, you know, Latin America, Caribbean, anti-imperialism. But he's also big on, you know, does a lot of work on Gaza. Dan Kovalik, both of these guys get back to the airport to come back to the United States. They didn't really have anything on them. They hadn't violated any laws. So they took them aside. They took their cell phones. They took their, you know, electronics, and they basically harassed them for several hours and let them go. We're seeing an increase that seems to me in these instances where the people didn't violate the law and they can't do anything to them. They just try to take them out. I don't know if you're familiar with the Uhuru 3, the African People's Socialist Party here, a very small group that does work in very poor Black neighborhoods, right? And you're Russian bots. We got to take you out, right? They're going after individuals, very small groups. They're going after, you know, not these huge groups, but the smallest of small voices. Your thoughts on this crackdown on dissent, and especially the anti-imperialist, even at, like I said, just these aren't powerful organizations oftentimes. They're small groups or individuals. Your thoughts?
You know, coming back to what you were saying right at the beginning, Garland, about this, the way that, you know, people are voting because they're angry, increasing sense of alienation, disenfranchisement, disconnection from the ruling elites, from the politicians who claim to represent us but clearly don't, a growing awareness that nobody in power is responsive to or representative of our views or our needs. And nothing changes. You know, you constantly vote. You go vote Labour, vote Tory, vote Labour, and nothing happens. Nothing changes. Or vote Lib Dem. No, nothing changes. Right. So this sense of desperation that we need something different, but without an understanding of how you get something different. So it's like, well, just find an electoral alternative then. You know, maybe a right populist, maybe a left populist. You know, someone who promises to do it different, to make a clean sweep, to get rid of the corruption, to be responsive to what we need, who tells us they know what the solution is and they can do something about it. You know, people are desperate for that. They're desperate for that, but of course they don't have the wider understanding of the system to understand that it's not going to come through Parliament. But as far as the ruling class is concerned, this descent towards fascism, this crushing of dissent, these go hand in hand with the deepening of their economic crisis and the accelerating of their war drive, because the war drive is not popular amongst the people. The descent into poverty of the masses, of course, creates a huge groundswell of anger, resentment, frustration. So there's various things they need to do about all of that. You know, it's very clear to us that the Labour government has been brought in by the ruling class. They wanted Keir Starmer in. They wanted him to have a stable majority, and they worked very hard to make sure he got that, like as in a parliamentary majority. That means nobody can stop his government passing anything it wants to pass, right? And the reason for that is the ruling class understands that this coming period, they're not going to be able to solve any of the problems for the working class. They held out Labour as this kind of like hope that, oh, if we just get rid of the Tories, they've been in for ages, and everyone knows Tories hate the working class. If we get a Labour government, maybe it will be better, and maybe they'll fix the NHS, because everyone knows that Labour Party loves the NHS and will fix it for us. You know, that's our health service, sorry. And of course, not only is none of the things that people wish Labour would do are none of them going to happen, because they can't, because that's not on the capitalist agenda right now. But in fact, more repression is going to be required. And the more resistance there is, the more repression there is going to need to be. And the more that they need a government in power which they feel is going to be useful in such a period of turmoil. And essentially, in Britain, the Labour Party is great for that type of repression because it has the trade unions, such as they remain at this point in time, which is a shadow of their former selves, but still, they do exist. It has them in their pocket. So when there's a Labour government in, what happens when the workers want to protest about something economic or political? The trade union leaders say, don't rock the boat, you'll let the Tories in. And they hold this kind of threat over people as if, well, Labour is the best you can get. So, okay, this isn't very good. And yes, we should pressure Keir Starmer. And yes, wouldn't it be good if we could get Jeremy Corbyn back as the leader of the Labour Party? And, you know, that's really something we should think about. How do we do that again? You know, although, in fact, one of the first things Keir Starmer's done in terms of his own party, now that he's been elected to office, is propose a rule change in the Labour Party's rules to make sure that something like getting Corbyn elected as leader, which was a total accident and fluke, will never happen again. So, and they called it was brilliant because they called it the Liz Truss look, to kind of make out like having an unpopular leader is somehow the reason for failures of government, or incompetent or whatever. But essentially, it's the Jeremy Corbyn look. It's the like, don't let some mild social democrat back into the position of Labour leader because that scuppers the ability of the ruling class to direct it in exactly the way they want to. Although I highly doubt it would have been quite as problematic as people seem to think. But of course, the real problem with Jeremy Corbyn was he's not a Zionist, and he can't even pretend to be, because he spent as the official left Labour person designated to be in charge of Palestine solidarity. He spent 30 years on platforms of Palestine solidarity campaigns going, "Ooh, this is really bad," and because of that, he can't suddenly be turned into somebody who supports Zionism unconditionally. And of course, British imperialism demands that. And Keir Starmer has shown that he perfectly understands that that's what British imperialism demands, and has been, you know, auditioning on his knees for, you know, a decade to the Zionist lobby. Look, I am completely servile before the requirements of Zionism and the requirements of Anglo-American imperialism in the Middle East. So the system is in crisis. It's descending into crisis. The people are descending into poverty. This system has nothing positive to offer the people. So it does two things. One, it sows division in as many ways as it possibly can. It stokes these culture wars. It stokes racial division, stirs up pogroms like we saw in Britain this summer. But look at the way the Labour government is using these pogroms. On the one hand, it stokes the racism. It facilitates the racism and really promotes it to allow these pogroms to take place. And then it steps in and from the other side and says, oh my goodness, isn't this terrible? We need to protect you, the people, against this awful rampaging of vicious racists on our streets. The legal system's not up to the job. We're going to have to overhaul the legal system. How will we overhaul the legal system? Well, we need to increasingly curtail the right to free speech, the right to assemble, the right to any type of protest. Even online speech now must be policed and targeted. If we think you're guilty of hate speech, not stirring up racist murder, hate speech, we will come for you. We will show no mercy.
Let me ask a quick question. Could one suspect, not that it changes anything, that there are times when they are involved through agent provocateurs, through doing things online, that if oftentimes, I know in the 60s and different times when we look back, that the US, the FBI had infiltrated various left-leaning groups or right-leaning, any group, and that they would say, hey, you know, guys, we probably should go out here and kidnap somebody or blow something up or do something. And the people in the group would say, I don't think that's a good idea. Yeah, great, here's some money, let's do it. So they would create the crisis and then arrest the people and say, oh my God, we've got to save you from this crisis.
That's exactly right, Garland. And in the case of the recent racist pogroms that we had, you know, in the summer here, I think that's exactly what happened. I think the people who stir these things up, and again, they use the fact that you know, you can then point to some social media posts which are misleading and lying and are stirring up problems, and people who are going around communities with leaflets that tell lies and stir people up and say, oh, look at these people telling lies and stirring people up. You know, we've got to clamp down on this hate speech. It's like, those people are backed and funded by the state for sure. Right? That strategy is being used by the ruling class to misdirect the anger of people in the poorest, most left behind communities, which should be united together against the system which has treated them so badly and offers them nothing. But instead they're being told, you know that your life used to be better. Do you know what's changed since you had a good life between then and now? It's loads of immigrants came and it's out of control. And because of them, you can't get a doctor's appointment. Right. And it's total nonsense. If you know, the numbers of immigrants, etc., you can look at all these things and disprove it point by point by point. But if you want to look, for example, I was just reading an article one of my comrades wrote about what's happened to the National Health Service in Britain. And the biggest, you know, he showed that there's this curve of number of beds in the health service. And it starts this year at 2010 and it just goes like that. But the biggest decline was under, or maybe it was 2000, sorry. And the biggest decline was under the Labour Party. Huge chopping of National Health Service hospital beds under Labour and frontline staff. And then, well, of course, if you take away hospitals and hospital beds and GP surgeries and nurses and doctors, and if you also make the conditions of work for all the health practitioners so stressful and horrible that loads of them leave, and then you've got a staffing crisis on top of a, you know, generally inadequate service, you know, then that's massively compounded, and then all the people who are left want to leave, right? And then the whole service doesn't work, and then you say, but do you know, a whole load of immigrants came in the last 40 years. You've seen them, and of course, one of the ways they make people feel like that is a true thing from their experience is the government has a policy, Labour as well as Tory, that when they house refugees and asylum seekers, if they're not putting them in prisons, which Tony Blair built prisons for asylum seekers, essentially. But what the other thing they'll do is they'll hire out a hotel or a bed and breakfast in a place that's very run down economically, where people no longer come and use that hotel. So it's empty, right? Essentially, they're not getting any business. And they'll give it a fat contract to house asylum seekers in hideous conditions, but it's in a very rundown area where the local population is very poor. And they'll be very obviously there because they've got nothing to do. They're not allowed to work. They're not allowed to work. They're given like £5 a day to just try and survive. And they're kept like that in essentially a kind of slightly open prison for a kind of infinite amount of time while their applications are not really dealt with. So then right-wing demagogues go into these communities and say, see, those people there, they're dangerous to you. Some of them are looking at your women and children. Some of them are men of military age. Some of them are jihadi. You know, they'll use all the tropes from the bourgeois media. They'll spread lies, and then they'll say, and you know that you can't get a hip replacement operation. You know how you can't get a doctor's appointment? It's because of them, right? You know how you can't find a job? Because of them, those people who also don't have jobs, right? You know, so you're asking the poorest victims of the home community to turn their anger and frustration against the poorest and most vilified victims of the whole system globally. And, you know, sometimes that can be very effective because it preys on people's ignorance. And it preys on a whole load of misinformation, but that misinformation is stirred up as much by the Tories as by the Labour Party, the Lib Dems. All of the main parties play this bidding war with one another in order to keep the working class stupid and divided and fighting itself instead of getting together to fight them. You're muted.
Thank you. You always remind, you know, we do this every week. I start talking and you're like, Garland, and I'm like, oh, but at any rate, well, thank you very much. Where can people go online to find all of your stuff and your information and further and all that?
All of that. So as I always say, my preferred social media platform is Telegram. While it's still there, you can find me by just searching for Joti Brar on Telegram. Also, you can find my party, which is The Communists, also on Telegram. That's our URL, thecommunists.org. Come to our website, sign up for our newsletter. It's free, it's not spammy, it's very, very useful analysis. If you want to see our videos, there's lots of presentations on all kinds of useful topics. That is Proletarian TV on YouTube. We're in various other places, but those are the best ones.
Thank you very much. Certainly appreciate that. Everybody, don't forget, I don't know what's going on here. Share this on all your social media platforms. As you know, the algorithms are not kind to us. Hit like anyway. You particularly Telegram, particularly on X Twitter. I'm not on Twitter X at this time. So share this. Share all of Joti's info, and hope you enjoy it. What else is it? We got more time. What else do you have?
I don't like to interrupt you, Garland. I suddenly remembered. I just wanted to thank, I forgot to write his name down, but there is a Russian comrade who runs a YouTube channel called Russian Accent. And you know now, because I've sort of fairly recently become aware of it, but last week after we did our big talk about World War II, he almost straight away translated that entire thing and put it up over the weekend, which is a huge job, right? Because it was a long discussion. And that's a lot of work, first to do his translation and then to re-record it, because he does voiceovers for Russian speakers. And I just basically want to acknowledge that that's a huge amount of work that he's doing and thank him for it. It's not just, he watches a lot of Western commentators. So he watches your channel a lot, Garland. I think he watches people like Scott Ritter and various others. And when he sees something that he thinks the Russian audience would like to hear or is useful or interesting from their perspective, he'll take a chunk or a whole talk and do this work of translating it and voiceovering it. And it's a very, very valuable service, I think, to be able to help our discussions cross those linguistic boundaries.
Well, wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you over there at Russian Accents. We really appreciate that. And you certainly, Russian Accents, you certainly have my permission to anything you find on my channel. I would be honored, in fact, if you find that it is important enough to translate it into your native language and make it available to your audience. Joti, thank you very much. And we will talk again soon. Everybody, as I said, don't forget, share this on all your social media platforms and follow me on Rockfin, follow me on Rumble, because with all of this, tomfoolery going on with the government going after various alternative media outlets, you never know when they're going to shut us down one place or another. So as many outlets as you can follow me on, the better. If they throw me off YouTube or whatever on any given day, you'll be able to find me elsewhere. Share this everywhere. Thanks a lot. We're out.